Hi everyone! Thanks for watching. Today I'm going to talk about something that I haven't really touched on yet, but this page was kind of initially meant for me to kind of have a blog and be able to talk about my experience as a med student. And then I kind of got carried away with the sex ed, which I definitely am going to keep doing, and there's going to be a lot of sex medicine centric content on this page. But I'm also going to be posting a little bit more about the med school experience and what it was like for me applying to med school. And so I am excited to share that with you guys. So I have a very, very non-traditional story into medicine. And I'm going to share the rest of that story in a different video. I'm going to do like a video just about like my journey to how I got here. But for this video specifically, I'm just going to talk about M1 and do a wrap up of what this first year was like. I'm going to be very transparent with you guys about my experience. I am the first to say that I had no idea what I was doing. I remember I showed up on the first day of orientation and I walked into campus terrified. I was scared to meet people, which is kind of an embarrassing thing to say now that I definitely have friends in my class and have kind of found my place, but I was terrified to meet people. I definitely had the feeling that like I am not the typical med student. I didn't feel like there was a lot of people who liked the things that I was into outside of studying science and anatomy. And I kind of went into med school thinking that there's not going to be anyone like me and I'm not going to be able to make friends, so I may as well just like get good at being alone from day one. And that's pretty much what I did. I showed up. I remember going into the check-in desk and there was our names were all in these folders, and I had that feeling, that imposter syndrome feeling that any med student has when you show up, and I was certain my name was not going to be there. Just because there's like so many things you can forget to do, so many hoops you have to jump through just to get to that place. And I had that same feeling on my white coat day. Like I just felt like something's gonna go wrong. There's no way that this is actually like falling into place. Like this is too much of an orchestration to be able to like actually work out. And I think those thoughts are not unique to me, and that a lot of people in med school definitely have those thoughts. But when I saw my name on that folder, I was like, all right, this is real. Like I'm doing this. So one of the things that I didn't really realize at all going into med school is that like you can't just study from the resources provided to you by your professors. And I'm a little embarrassed to admit that, because a lot of people that were like I come into contact now all kind of look at me when I say that like, what do you mean? Of course you know about Sketchy and Anki and all these things, and I didn't. I literally had no idea. But I think that it just goes to show you that like people come into med school with all levels of exposure to the materials that they have to offer and the materials that they're going to need to pass and do well in step one. I was extremely underprepared for the load of material that we got in med school. I think my whole life have been like a really efficient science student, and I've always been able to get good grades, get straight A's in science. That's how you end up in med school, is if you can get straight A's in science classes. I really don't know what I was thinking. It's funny to look back on your orientation self and just be like, you had so much to learn. One of the things I'm probably the most embarrassed to admit that I did not know enough about was step one. I got to med school and I'm pretty embarrassed to admit, like, I had no idea what step one was. I knew we had to take board exams and I knew that we would have exams in school, but like, I just was not wired into like, I didn't ever really pay attention to student doctor network or like Reddit pages about med school. I just was kind of like, that stuff's gonna make me anxious, so I'm going to find my own resources and kind of do it myself. And I did that, and it definitely is doable, but sometimes I'm grateful that I didn't look at those things, because I really, now that I look back on them, I think I would have thought that I was not capable of getting to the place that I am now if I had looked at those pages. I just was like, how did I get here? How do I not know what step one is, or like when we're going to be taking it, or what it's going to be on? Like, I just felt so out of the loop. And I think that I'm definitely not the only person that feels that way, but I'm definitely one of the few people, at least, that I have come into contact that would admit that they like really didn't know what they were getting themselves into. So at first I was like, well, I have to get all of these because that's the only way I can be successful, and that is so wrong. I quickly realized that like Anki, the way I was trying to learn it, was not for me. And I couldn't figure it out. The interface, if you haven't used it, is like very ugly. And I was just like, this is too ugly for me. I don't want to do this. So I didn't use Anki very often, but now that I'm getting closer to step 1, I am definitely considering using Anki more. But there were things like the day I got ready for orientation and the first couple months of med school, I would wake up and be like, what do I even wear? Like, I can't wear this. For a while there, I was just wearing like very plain things and just trying to blend in and not draw attention to myself and really just like be part of the herd, and most of all just like not draw attention to myself. I was just like, I just am here to learn, and that's already a challenge. So let me just like try to get that on first before I can like at all think about like friends or like style or like having my own personality. So I basically gave up my personality for like my first half of my first year of med school, and slowly getting it back and like putting clips that I like back in and little ways for me to feel like, okay, I can be myself and also be a part of this community of future doctors and maintain professionalism when you need to, when you're going to wear your white coat and when you are going to be around patients or doing a clinical interviewing practice with a standardized patient. You need to dress the part. And that's also gotten exciting for me because I didn't know that I would like wearing business casual clothes or the feeling of wearing a suit or the feeling of just being professional. I've always kind of been this like colorful, I wear like, I mean, you guys see I wear like crazy accessories a lot. Like, I am now realizing that I don't really necessarily have to give that up. Oh, okay, another thing I want to talk about. During our orientation, there was a lot of presentations and talks about burnout, suicide prevention, anxiety and depression, and the alarming rates of these things in doctors. So imagine you've studied your whole life to get here, and they spend most of the full week being like, you might have these thoughts, and when you do, here's where you can go. I am so grateful that they provide us with these resources and are transparent about it from the get-go. That was really comforting. But at the same time, it's like, I should expect to want to be suicidal? Like, it's a lot. It's a lot. And I didn't even know what that meant. I just kind of heard them saying it and was like, okay, yeah, whatever. Like, I can definitely handle it. I've been able to handle anything. That's like the medical student's mindset is like, I can handle it. If I got this far, I can handle it. Well, the truth is, like, you can't handle it, and there's a lot of things that you're not going to be able to handle, and at those points, like, you need to ask for help, and your school should have the resources to be able to help you, but do not be afraid to ask for help. Let's go through classes, and I'm going to talk about some of my favorite classes of M1 and some of the classes that were, like, probably the most intense for me. At the beginning of the year, we had our cell and molecular biology module and epidemiology and biostatistics. I was horrible at statistics in college. We had to take it, I did it, and surprisingly, epidemiology and stats was one of my best classes of this year. I don't really know why, but it's just surprising how things that you used to be bad at might not be as bad at. In a similar vein, I got my bachelor's in biological sciences, and one of my most challenging courses of M1 was cell and molecular biology. It is a lot. It is a biochem heavy course, and I did very well in biochem in my undergrad. It was very surprising to me, and almost I took it very personally. I was like, how is someone that literally got a bachelor's and master's in biology like not able to do this easily? And that's just like the beginning of med school for you. Things that you thought you were good at that you just get slapped in the face with the realness and being like, nope, you're gonna get put in your place and you're gonna have to figure it out. And luckily my school has so many resources for if you're struggling, and I know lots of people who've taken advantage of those resources, and it's really, really great. It's something that you don't realize at the beginning, that like you can ask for help. It was like a week's worth of material would have been taught in my master's in like 4 to 6 months. And we obviously weren't expected to have it all down perfectly, but it's just, as they say, drinking out of a fire hose. Didn't know what that meant, and then I really, really learned what that meant during anatomy. And anatomy is by far the most transformative experience of my year of M1. You are thrown thousands of pieces of information, of origins and insertions of muscles, the actions of that muscle, the innervation of that muscle, knowing every single branching of the spinal cord. No one can tell you what it's like when you walk into a cadaver lab for the first time and your objective is to cut that body open on the first day. Dissection is some other stuff. It is heavy, and I loved it. My first anatomy exam, I failed, and my school is pass-fail, as a lot of med schools are these days, and so that was like a very quick wake-up call that like I needed to learn how to study this stuff, and the way that I had known how to study was not going to cut it. So after I did that, I started spending a ton of time in the lab. I had this very, very, very extensive Excel spreadsheet with origin, insertion of the muscles, their action, spinal levels. I would have like arteries and their branching patterns, and like I would just find all these new ways I had never studied before to try to like get it in my brain. And that's what med school is about, is like finding what works for you, because not everything is going to work for everyone. Our first practical was the most terrified I've ever been for anything performance-wise. I've been in theater and dance since I was 3 years old. I've been on stage a lot in my life. I've sang many solos and choir and stuff. I've never been more terrified than my first anatomy practical. You walk into this room, there's 40 or so stations. Most of them are full cadavers. Some of them are just a body part on a tray. And you have 70-ish seconds to answer a very specific, detailed question about that. And there's a couple rest stations where you can kind of go through and like try to remember what you had been looking at and try to visualize it and be like, but you run out of time very quickly. They're toughening you up. I could hear people throughout the room starting to kind of go down and let their anxieties kind of take control audibly, and I just had to stand up tall and force confidence in myself that I've never known I had. After I got the confidence from that first practical and from knowing what it was going to be like and passing it, I got this newfound like, okay, like I can do this, and I'm actually kind of good at it, and I have some friends that struggled, and it felt really good to be able to be useful to them and to help them with like some crazy mnemonic that I had come up with in my head that they might not have thought of. And they helped me too so much. Study with your friends in the lab. Go to the lab and study with your friends. Go to the lab late at night and study with your friends. Our lab was open 24 hours, and there are people who would literally go on weekends at midnight and study bones, go up to cadavers, move muscles around, look for nerves, look for arteries, be covered in preservative in the locker room, and just be like, another day, keep going, we got this, you're in it. For that short amount of time that you're in the lab, you are there to learn, and while emotions definitely do get in the way, especially dissections like the muscles and features of the face, it can be very, very hard to suppress like emotional feelings that you have when you're doing these actions. But clinical detachment is something that learning was necessary. You have to learn how to do that. And it allows for crazy learning opportunity. I mean, I remember dissecting a hand of one of the bodies that we were assigned, and just all of the intricate tiny muscles and tiny joints, and the physics of the hand is so crazy. I was just sitting there doing my work thinking, I wonder what story this hand has, like what meals they prepared with these hands. They played catch with these hands. How many hands did this hand hold? Like, all of these bodies had a story, and I really tried to kind of appreciate their life and do as best of a dissection as I could in order to kind of honor their service in donating themselves so we could gain knowledge from their anatomy. It was really, really cool, and it is just, it's an intense thing, like caring about dissection and taking pride in your work. Like I never really thought about dissection and whether or not I would be good at it, but I remember doing a dissection on the joints of the elbow, and I had been instructed to really clarify the ligaments and kind of isolate them. And being able to present this to my instructor and saying like, good job, that's a good dissection. That was one of the first big moments of pride for me. I finally felt like, okay, maybe this is something that I could be good at. Anatomy helps you learn about parts of the body that you just didn't really appreciate as much before. We did not get to do as thorough of a dissection on the pelvis and perineum as I would have liked. Our pelvis dissection was pretty in-depth, but it was a lot. I just remember thinking the pelvis was so hard. The branchings of like the iliac arteries, I remember like, can't wait to study that again for step 1. But for now, I can put it out of sight, out of mind for just a little bit longer. But we didn't really get to do anything really that hands-on with the genital area and the perineum. Most of those were actually prosected bodies that we were instructed to kind of go learn on the prosections and not able to ever dissect ourselves. So I actually did not ever see the internal structure of the clitoris, or like really the clitoris at all outside of the external portion. It was actually labeled in one of my practicals, which I thought was cool. Shouts out to my teachers for reminding everyone that the clitoris is important, that we should know it for boards. But we definitely did not learn the full structure of the clitoris that I am very vocal about on social media, and I really have kind of made it one of my missions to like educate people on the stuff that like is barely even in OBGYN textbooks. There's a lot of textbooks that specialists are still using that don't include this anatomy, and it's concerning for a multitude of reasons, but I am eager to get back in the lab and do some dissections myself, and I will obviously be keeping you guys updated on that as well. I have a lot of friends who really have different views about that class and really had a lot more negative experiences than I did, so I'm really grateful that I was able to come out of it on the other end so positively, because it can be a really heavy course. It's a lot, but it's amazing. And I'm super excited that I got to be able to have in-person dissections before this entire like pandemic happened. One of the classes that I found the most difficult was clinical interviewing. I really struggled with my nerves, honestly. Like, I'm a very talkative person. I don't usually have problems with speaking, but it is hard performing in front of 5 of your classmates and a professor who's also an MD, who's also maybe a PhD. Like, it's a lot of pressure to just be like, I don't know anything. I have barely started learning things, and all I can say is that it takes repetition. And after I would make a mistake, I would never make that mistake ever again. But don't be so hard on yourself if you don't get it the first couple times. Like, there's a reason that they allow you multiple times to practice interviewing on a standardized patient before you have to actually go to rounds. It's for this exact reason, so that you can get comfortable in that seat, stand up tall, be able to make eye contact the whole time, get all of the information that you need from that patient in order to give them the best possible medical care that they can have. Immuno and Pharm. This was my hardest class of the year. I have never taken an immunology class. I felt like it was what could have been taught in 6 months and 2 weeks. We did a 2-week block of immuno that led into an introductory pharmacology course, and I struggled very hard during that course, and only in the last week of the course, when I was actually terrified of whether or not I was going to have to be in remediation for the course and maybe have to take it again, did I discover Sketchy. I know what you may be thinking. Rainey, how did you not know what Sketchy was? Why hadn't you been using Sketchy this whole time? Because I'm stupid. And I had people tell me, how are you learning bugs and drugs without Sketchy? And I was like, I don't even know. I'm just kind of trying to write them all out. And I don't think that I would be able to say with confidence that I feel like I can do med school now without Sketchy. It is these visual mnemonics. Look it up if you're not familiar with it. But every time I need to think about Hodgkin's lymphomas, I think of the Harry Potter scene. Every time I need to think about beta-lactam antibiotics, I think of the Star Wars scenes. I'm like super into like fandoms and stuff like that, and they incorporate so many things like that. The antifungals one is the Wizard of Oz. It's rad. I highly recommend using Sketchy. I highly recommend using Boards and Beyond, which I also didn't start using until probably towards the middle of the second semester. I mean, I was doing myself a disservice by trying to just kind of tough it out, and I should have been using Sketchy the whole time, and it was a big mistake that now I like am super public about. Like, go use Sketchy. It'll save your life. You'll have time to actually like have a life in med school if you use Sketchy, in my opinion. If you're not a visual learner, there's plenty of other things that you can try, but I'm a very, very visual learner, and being able to just kind of reproduce those images on an exam, I am hopeful is going to be extremely helpful for step 1. There were other courses we took throughout the year. I also liked our Heme module. Learning about like blood dynamics was something that was totally new to me. You don't really learn about like clotting and bleeding and the pathology and physiology of those things until med school. I definitely use Pathoma all the time for my pathology. I was so surprised how much I loved Path. I thought like initially looking at slides of pathology would be like something really boring to me, and I love it. It was awesome. It's like being a detective, and if you can kind of turn Path into like your own little detective operation, then I would recommend doing that. For Neuro, my Neuro course actually started right around when the pandemic started, and our entire Neuro course was actually remote via like Zoom and recorded lectures, and it was very different, but I personally learned a lot and was kind of grateful for like the breather. Obviously the pandemic has been very, very hard for everyone, but in this specific instance, I think it definitely gave us a little bit of a breather to be able to really dive into all of the memorization of one of the hardest courses in your first year of med school. It's a lot. And the last course we had of the year was our behavioral sciences psychology course, introduction. It was incredible. That was the point where I realized that there are definitely aspects of my mental health that I really had been pushing off dealing with for a long time, and finally have gotten some of the help that I've really probably needed for a long time, and I feel a lot better. I've always been the kind of person that's like, I'm strong enough to deal with it and I don't need help from anyone, and med school showed me that like I do need help from people, and it might not be all the time, but there's definitely gonna be times, especially for us and what we have to go through during these early years, that getting some help is like totally okay and like necessary. And I'm definitely gonna be planning on doing it at different points this year too. I know that there's a lot that we're going to have to get through this year before dedicated and studying for step 1. But with the pandemic and all of the social justice things going on in the world that I really want to be a part of, it can be hard knowing that your availability is limited by your dedication and like commitment to your career. Alright guys, that's it from me. If you guys have any recommendations on content that you want to hear like that's specific about med school, please feel free to reach out to me. I would love to do more videos about this stuff. I definitely was ill-equipped myself and would love to be able to help anyone who feels like they don't necessarily fit into the normal med student prototype. Thank you so much for listening to this. I feel so good after just like sharing my experience. This whole like journaling, vlogging thing actually might be something that like is good for my mental health. So maybe I'm just gonna keep doing it for that reason too, regardless of whether or not people are watching. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.